It begins with a scream muffled, desperate, recorded on a tape no one was supposed to hear. In a locked drawer inside a San Francisco townhouse, a stack of reel-to-reel tapes sits untouched. Each one is labeled in neat, fading ink. Norliss, Case File 1, Case File 2, and so on. The man who recorded them? Gone. No body, no goodbye, just a final message. If anything happens to me, play the tapes. The Norliss Tapes isn't just a made-for-TV movie from 1973. It's a relic, a blueprint, a warning. Long before the X-Files, before found footage horror, before missing person podcasts flooded the internet, there was David Norliss, a journalist documenting the supernatural with nothing but his voice and growing fear. Dan Curtis, the mastermind behind Dark Shadows, crafted a world of shadows, blood rituals, and vampiric possession on a shoestring budget. And somehow, it worked. The visuals were muted, but the dread was loud. The monsters were rarely seen, but always present. And just when the pilot promised something bigger, it vanished much like Norliss himself. The master tapes? Nearly lost in studio mergers. The cast? Haunted by roles they couldn't explain. The story? More fact than fiction. If you believe what was whispered on set, this wasn't just a TV movie. It was a door that almost opened, and maybe, mercifully, didn't. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about the Norliss Tapes. 1973. Fact 1. The tape begins with a real missing person case. The movie opens with a phone ringing in the dark. A friend can't reach David Norliss, a reporter who vanished without a trace. But that setup wasn't entirely fiction. Dan Curtis and writer William F. Nolan reportedly based the premise on a real investigative journalist in Los Angeles who disappeared in the late 1960 seconds after researching fringe cults. While the name was changed, the eerily similar circumstances, a writer who left behind only audio notes, created tension even among the crew. The first lines we hear on tape aren't theatrical, they're oddly flat, journalistic. Norliss doesn't claim ghosts or demons. He sounds tired, paranoid, as if he's already seen something that broke him. What most viewers miss is that the voice on the tape, read by actor Roy Thins, was recorded before the rest of the film. Dan Curtis instructed Thins to sound like a man who's just come back from hell. They even degraded the audio manually, playing it through old equipment to create a raw, analog effect decades before digital filters existed. Ironically, that effect worked too well. Test audiences assumed the tapes were real recordings, not part of the fiction. NBC executives had to add a disclaimer before airing. So while the story begins with fiction, the fear? It came from somewhere else. Fact 2. The actress who fainted after hearing the tape. As Norliss's tape begins, we're introduced to his editor, who listens in horror as David recounts a case involving the recent widow of a sculptor. The scene was meant to be simple, just a woman reacting to a voice on tape, but on set, something went wrong. Actress Angie Dickinson, who was originally cast in the role, reportedly collapsed during her first read-through of the scene. According to crew members, she turned pale and said, "That voice, I've heard it before." She left the project the next day and was swiftly replaced. Officially, NBC blamed scheduling conflicts, but one assistant director later claimed Angie believed the voice matched that of a man who had stalked her years earlier, a man who also disappeared without a trace. To cover the incident, production recast the role with Michelle Carey at the last minute and reshot all her scenes. The original footage with Dickinson? Lost. Curtis never spoke publicly about it. What remained, though, was the effect. The unease in Carey's performance wasn't entirely acting. She admitted years later, "I didn't want to be alone in that soundstage with that tape playing. It felt inhabited." Fact 3. The sculptor's clay wasn't just clay. When Norliss investigates Ellen Court's deceased husband, we see the eerie sculptures he left behind, distorted, lifeless figures with hollow eyes. But behind the scenes, the props department had their own horror story. Production designers sourced actual clay from a closed ceramics facility in Marin County, a place with a long reputation for strange accidents. Staff members joked about the place being cursed, but Dan Curtis insisted on using it for realism. The statues arrived on set. Days later, 3 crew members, including a lighting technician, developed mysterious skin reactions, including rashes and blisters. One claimed the clay smelled like blood when it dried. Another said the eyes on the sculptures shifted overnight. A lab test revealed trace amounts of animal collagen and bone dust mixed into the batch, something not listed in the prop order. When asked, the clay supplier refused to comment, only saying the mix had been special ordered years earlier by an unnamed art collective. In the film, The sculptor is said to be experimenting with new materials. Turns out, so was the production team, just not by choice. Fact 4. The house exterior was filmed on an abandoned sanitorium. The imposing mansion of Ellen Court, where most of the film takes place, wasn't a Hollywood backlot set. It was a real structure located north of San Francisco, on the grounds of what used to be the Belmont Hills Sanatorium, shut down in the 1952. Dan Curtis specifically chose it after scouting locations with an architectural presence. But once filming began, the production faced problems: power outages, interference in audio channels, and camera fogging, especially near the cellar doors. One audio engineer claimed his Nagra recorder picked up whispers in reverse playback, though nothing was audible during the actual scene. NBC executives dismissed it as malfunction until 2 separate crews refused to return to film night scenes. The production moved interior shots to a soundstage, but the exterior stayed. And here's the strange part. After the film aired, multiple viewers wrote to NBC, claiming they recognized the house not from real life, but from dreams. Several described a red staircase never shown in the movie, but that actually existed inside the house. Maybe the house wasn't haunted, but something about it stayed in the film and in people's minds. Fact 5. The photograph that didn't exist. One of the creepiest moments in the Norliss Tapes is when Ellen shows David a photo of her late husband alive and well, taken days after his burial. The photo was a simple prop dash, except it wasn't. The original script called for a blurred, low-light picture, easily explained away. But when the Polaroid developed on set, the image showed more than just the sculptor. Behind him, barely visible, stood a second figure, taller, distorted, its face smeared beyond recognition. Dan Curtis reportedly kept the photo, but in later interviews, he described it as an accident, some kind of light reflection. Still, the photo spooked the crew so badly that they reshot the scene using a completely different angle. That original Polaroid? It's not in the archives, but a production assistant claims it was mailed anonymously to a horror magazine in the 80 seconds and never published. What's more bizarre is that years later, fans freeze-framed the scene and noticed something: a shadow behind the husband. Not part of the lighting, not part of the set, just standing there, watching. Fact 6. The sculptor's voice was re-recorded by a stranger. When the undead sculptor finally speaks in the film, his voice is chilling deep, inhuman, cracked with centuries of rot. But that voice doesn't belong to the actor who played him. The original audio track, recorded by actor Nick Dimitri, was deemed too clean. So Curtis brought in a voice actor, except no one remembers hiring him. According to production logs, the re-recording session took place after hours, with only Curtis, the sound engineer, and an uncredited talent listed as Mr. D. The sound engineer later described him as gaunt, pale, with eyes that didn't reflect light. After delivering the lines in one take, the man vanished. No contract, no agent, no follow-up. The engineer said Curtis only smiled and said, "That's the voice I heard in my sleep." Years later, when NBC tried to remaster the audio, they couldn't isolate the voice track. It was embedded in the mix, almost like it didn't want to be removed. Fact 7. The cemetery scene was interrupted by a real funeral. In the middle of the film, David Norliss visits a cemetery to investigate the supposed burial of James Court. It's one of the eeriest sequences, fog-drenched, silent, unnaturally still. But few viewers know how unsettling that day was for the crew. The cemetery used was an actual resting place in Sonoma County, chosen for its maze-like tomb architecture. The filming was scheduled at dawn to avoid real mourners, but on that morning, the crew discovered a real funeral had been mistakenly booked for the same site at the exact time the grave digging scene was being prepared. Out of respect, Curtis halted production. But as the funeral took place, several staff noticed something chilling. The real coffin being lowered shared the same last name as the character being exhumed in the film Court. The funeral director claimed it was a bizarre coincidence, but later, during playback, the sound crew picked up a woman's voice, whispering in the background, "He's not there." The audio wasn't usable, but the fear lingered. For the rest of the shoot, no one wanted to handle the shovel props. Fact 8. The morgue door that wouldn't stay closed. After the cemetery visit, Norliss heads to the morgue to investigate the missing corpse. The scene was filmed in a decommissioned hospital wing, repurposed for TV shoots. It was cold, echoing, and lined with real steel drawers. But there was a problem with drawer #4. Multiple takes had to be reshot because the drawer kept sliding open slowly despite being latched shut. Special effects was blamed at first, then gravity, then temperature shifts, but nothing explained why the drawer only opened during specific dialogue, particularly when the word undead was mentioned. The actor playing the coroner refused to continue unless the drawer was sealed shut with tape. Even then, during one take, the lights blew out mid-scene, plunging the set into total darkness. Curtis was delighted. He insisted on keeping the moment and the flickering lights in the final cut. He called it accidental atmosphere. The crew called it something else entirely. Fact 9. The ancient book wasn't a prop. Inside Ellen's home, Norliss finds an old leather-bound tome filled with symbols, rituals, and drawings of unholy resurrection. The script called for a fake book to be made by the props team, but Curtis rejected the prototype. Instead, he borrowed a real occult grimoire from a collector in Los Angeles, said to be a 19th century copy of the Livre Noir, a French ritual book banned in several countries. The pages used in the close-up shots were authentic, including invocations tied to blood resurrection, lunar sacrifice, and soul tethering. A Latin scholar was even hired to verify the contents, but quit after 3 days, saying, "This book wasn't meant to be read aloud." During filming, the book was kept in a locked case, but it mysteriously vanished 2 days before the final scene wrapped. No break-in was reported, nothing else was stolen. It was never found. In post-production, one editor joked, "Maybe the sculptor took it with him." Fact 10. Ellen Court's sleepwalking wasn't in the script. There's a chilling scene where Ellen Court is seen wandering the halls of her home at night barefoot, eyes unfocused, whispering something under her breath. It's a subtle moment, easy to miss, but it wasn't in the original script. Actress Michelle Carey reportedly began pacing the set between takes, speaking fragments of dialogue that no one had rehearsed. The camera crew, thinking it was part of the next scene, began rolling. When Dan Curtis saw the footage, he insisted it be used in the final cut, claiming it added realism to Ellen's psychic deterioration. But Carey later admitted in an interview, "I don't remember filming that part. I honestly thought it was a dream." One crew member recalled Carey saying she felt watched during those days and slept with her hotel lights on. The oddest part? Audio enhancement years later revealed that her whispering included phrases not in English but in Latin, none of which had been in the script, and no one ever found where she might have learned them. Fact 11. The nightgown scene was lit with real candlelight and caught fire. In the infamous nightgown scene, Ellen walks down a hallway, holding a candelabra as a shadowy figure passes behind her. The shot is hypnotic, warm, flickering, deeply unsettling. What most don't know is that it nearly ended in disaster. To achieve a truly gothic aesthetic, Curtis ordered that no artificial light be used. The entire scene was lit only by the candles in Carey's hands. No spotlights, no gels, just flame. But during the 6th take, the fabric of Carey's vintage nightgown brushed against one of the candles and ignited. The flame was quickly extinguished by a nearby grip, but Carey's arm was singed and part of the gown melted. Production halted for 48 hours. Carey returned with light burns, but insisted on completing the scene, this time with a flame-retardant replica of the original gown. The scene that made the final cut? It wasn't the replica. It was the 5th take right before the fire. And yes, the shadow figure in the background, not listed in the call sheet, not acknowledged by Curtis, still unidentified. Fact 12. The return of James Court was deliberately underlit for a disturbing reason. One of the most terrifying sequences in the Norliss tapes is the first time James Court presumed dead appears on screen, looming at the end of a hallway. Viewers only see his silhouette, barely illuminated. It was a bold, creative choice. But that darkness? It wasn't aesthetic. It was strategic censorship. According to a production assistant, the full makeup design for James Court was too graphic for 1,970 seconds television. The prosthetics created using animal bones, dental putty, and dyed latex gave him a partially decomposed face that NBC's standards team called viscerally offensive. Executives demanded the face be shown only in extreme shadow, and even then, only for under 3 seconds per shot. Dan Curtis fought to preserve more, but lost. What's even more disturbing is that the original full-face footage was destroyed after review. Curtis claimed he didn't want it leaked, but the actor playing Court later said, "When they applied the prosthetics, I didn't see a monster. I saw something familiar, like I'd worn that face before." Fact 13. The ritual scene was shot in a real wine cellar that wasn't empty. As Norliss descends into the Court basement, he discovers the space has been converted into a chamber for dark rituals, stone slabs, blood markings, a strange altar. What audiences didn't know was that this wasn't a set. It was an actual wine cellar beneath a historic inn near Sausalito. Production rented the space for its natural decay, but during setup, the crew made a disturbing discovery. Animal bones arranged in deliberate patterns, tucked into niches in the stone walls. The inn's manager claimed ignorance, saying the room hadn't been opened in decades. A local historian later told Curtis that the building was once owned by a 19th century spiritualist who held seances there weekly. Dan Curtis decided not to touch the bones. Instead, he left them in place, building the altar around them. He believed the real energy would enhance the performance. Strangely, none of the candles would stay lit for more than a few minutes during filming. Flame after flame sputtered out. Eventually, they filmed by lantern light using gas instead of wax. And in the background of one take, a sound technician picked up what he described as chanting that didn't match the script. Only one person had been speaking. Fact 14. The blood used on set was a secret mix and may not have been fake. For the resurrection ritual scene, thick blood is poured into a stone bowl. The color is almost too vivid, the texture too real. That's because it wasn't standard stage blood. The original mixture wasn't showing up well on camera. Frustrated, Curtis ordered the FX team to find a new blend, something that looked visceral. What they came back with remains a mystery. The only notes on the material listed custom organic compound, but actors who handled it described the smell as iron heavy, and one wardrobe assistant reported that the mixture coagulated like real plasma. When asked what it was made from, the prop master just said, "You don't want to know." Even more unsettling, the bowl used in the ritual was found days after filming had wrapped, cracked in half, and dry inside, though it had never been cleaned. Some say the mixture was just corn syrup and dye. Others believe someone brought something to the set that shouldn't have left with them. Fact 15. The gemstone prop was never logged and has never been found. Throughout the film, James Court is seen clutching a strange blue-green gemstone said to be the source of his power. It glows under certain lighting, pulses in his hand, and seems to anchor his transformation. The script called for a simple resin replica, but on set, a real gemstone was substituted at the last minute, possibly a piece of fluorite or labradorite, both known for their iridescent qualities. The switch was made by an unnamed assistant who claimed to have something better. No official log of the gem exists in production archive. After filming, no one could find the stone. It wasn't returned with the rest of the props. It wasn't in the storage crates. It wasn't on the final continuity photos. Dan Curtis later joked in an interview, "Maybe it worked too well. Maybe someone took it and vanished." To this day, fans of the film refer to it as the Norliss Stone, a mysterious object that appeared out of nowhere and disappeared the same way. Fact 16. The chase scene wasn't choreographed, it was improvised in real time. In the final act, David Norliss is chased through the woods and back alleys by the resurrected James Court. The sequence is shaky, frantic, and oddly authentic because it wasn't rehearsed. Dan Curtis decided the fear wasn't real enough, so he gave Roy Thins, Norliss, no warning about where the actor playing Court would appear. The instructions were simple. Run when you hear the scream. Don't stop until I yell, cut. What followed was nearly 10 minutes of real panic. Thins later said he genuinely didn't know where the monster would come from. In one shot, he stumbles and falls that wasn't in the script. He twisted his ankle and kept going. The result was raw, chaotic, and haunting. You can see Thinnis glancing over his shoulder with real terror. The scene was so intense that NBC cut an entire 90-second segment where Court crawled upside down along a support beam. The footage is now lost. What made it into the final cut was just enough. Enough to make you wonder how much of what Norliss saw was really there. Fact 17. The burning house was actually set on fire then got out of control. To end the film, Norliss returns to Ellen Court's home as it bursts into flames, destroying all evidence of the resurrection ritual. The house fire is dramatic, consuming, and unnervingly realistic. That's because it was real. The production was granted permission to burn down a condemned house scheduled for demolition. Pyrotechnics were rigged, fire marshals were present, but something went wrong. The blaze spread faster than predicted, breaching safety barriers and burning through camera cables before the second camera could roll. The only footage that survived came from the main unit, a single, uninterrupted take from a tripod. What's bizarre is that in that final shot, a figure is seen standing in the upstairs window long after all cast and crew were confirmed clear of the building. NBC claimed it was a reflection, but when the film was remastered in the 1,990 seconds, the figure was still there, clearer, motionless, watching. Curtis refused to comment. The script never called for it, and no actor claimed it was them. Fact 18. The final tape cut off but left. 3 extra seconds of unexplained audio. The final moment of the Norliss tapes is unsettling in its abruptness. Norliss's voice, recorded on reel-to-reel, cuts out mid-sentence, then static, silence, end credits. But in the original master tape, the silence didn't last. Technicians who handled the raw audio noticed an extra 3.2 seconds of unexplained sound at the end of the reel. It wasn't room tone, it wasn't tape hiss, it was something else. When slowed down and reversed, the audio produced a pattern, rhythmic pulses like breathing, but from a distorted source. Some claimed it resembled speech, possibly in German or Latin. Others dismissed it as analog noise. Curtis was reportedly fascinated. He fought to leave it in, but NBC forced a clean cut, so it was buried. But that final tape, the master, was never returned to NBC. It disappeared from the vault in 1976. Only one person ever heard the uncut version, and they never worked in television again. Fact 19. A hidden connection to Dan Curtis's other work was found 20 years later. Fans of Dark Shadows and Trilogy of Terror often point to Dan Curtis's signature-style dreamlike horror, Undead Lovers, Rituals of Possession. But for decades, the Norliss tapes seemed disconnected from his other film, until a researcher in the 1,990 seconds noticed something. In one frame of Trilogy of Terror, a newspaper on a table carries the headline, "Journalist Missing After Occult Investigation," with a blurred photo that looks a lot like Roy Thin's. The paper was never meant to be legible, but when enhanced, it included the words Norliss and vanished. Was this a self-referential Easter egg? A retroactive connection? Or something more deliberate? Curtis was known to weave shared universes into his stories, subtle threads that hinted at larger mythologies. But he never commented on the newspaper, and when the original Trilogy of Terror prop master was asked, he simply said, "Dan always said Norliss wasn't done, just buried." Fact 20. The real reason the series was canceled was never made public. The Norliss Tapes was a pilot meant to launch a full TV series in 1974. NBC had approved 6 episodes. Scripts were outlined, sets were preserved, audience testing was positive. Then, everything stopped. Officially, the show was too expensive. But internal memos discovered years later told a different story. NBC execs reportedly received multiple letters from religious groups, warning that the show's themes invoked real-world occult danger. One memo included a typed note: "This series could open doors better left closed." Strangely, one of the planned future episodes was titled The Dark Reflection, featuring a cursed broadcast that causes disappearances. Curtis never spoke of it again. Roy Thin's moved on, and the pilot faded into obscurity. But the tapes, the fictional ones, and perhaps the real ones were never found. Which begs the question, was the Norliss tapes a failed TV experiment, or something that was deliberately silenced? Bonus fact: the final tape was numbered 13, but there were 14 slots. At the very end of the Norliss tapes, we return to the office where the reels were first discovered. On the desk, a tape recorder, a manila folder, and a rack of labeled tapes. The final shot lingers on tape Hasson 3 as it spins to silence. But sharp-eyed viewers notice something strange. The rack holding the tapes? It has 14 slots. That might seem trivial, a simple prop choice. But when fans freeze frame the image, they see the following. Tape Hasson through Hasson 3 are accounted for. Slot Hasson 4 is empty, and above it, faint handwriting reads, "Not for playback." This phrase never appears in the script. It's not mentioned in narration, but it's there scrawled in pen, as if added hastily. No one on the production team has ever confirmed whether this was intentional. In fact, during a 1984 horror convention, when asked about the missing tape, Roy Thin's reportedly replied, "We were never supposed to talk about Hasson 4. Dan wouldn't let us." What could have been on that final reel? A confession? A lost case file? Or something Norliss couldn't bring himself to record? One theory among dedicated fans is chilling. Tape Hasson 4 wasn't missing. It was hidden. Not in the world of the film, but in ours. And maybe, just maybe, someone's been listening. So, now we ask you, was the Norliss tapes just a forgotten TV relic? Or a warning that came too soon? Did Dan Curtis build a horror story? Or did he tap into something that was never meant for broadcast? And what do you think was on tape Hasson 4? Tell us in the comments. We're still listening.